Hello everybody and welcome back to our series on Docker containers. We have started the command line interface portion of this video series. In the last video, we learned how to do a Docker pull and we pulled down a WordPress image and we looked at the different elements of what the Docker images command outputs. So we understand that we have a local repository and we have our Docker images downloaded. So if I type in here Docker images, you can see that we downloaded from the last video a WordPress, and it's the latest version, and we also have an Ubuntu container on here. So in order to have some fun and have some utility, we're going to go ahead and play with our WordPress container and try and get a WordPress website up rather quickly. The only complication of this is we need to also have a database in the back end to handle our WordPress. So we'll go through all this together, so don't worry about it. Okay, so starting off, I'm going to show you that I have here the Docker Hub backup, and I've gone and I've searched for WordPress, and I have the WordPress page up. If you scroll down, each one of these official images generally has a how to use this image option. And it tells you here that you can type in this command to get your WordPress up and running. If you go down a little bit further, it offers you to access the container just by the standard IP address and port mappings, which makes it a little bit more simple. So we're going to go through this first as our example, just to see that we can get a WordPress container up and running and ready for us to access. So let's play around with that. So right here, I'm just going to grab this and I'm going to copy it. Then I'm going to switch over to my Ubuntu desktop application, and I'm going to go ahead and type in the command, which was docker run. Now, Docker is telling us that we want to do a Docker command. The run says that we want to run the container. We're going to give it a name called our WordPress, our first WordPress, just for fun. Now I'm going to add to this that I need to tell this that I want to connect my local port of my system that I'm running on, that I'm running this container on, to the actual container, so I can forward that port over to my container and utilize it, which you'll see in a second what I mean by this, by doing a -p, which is a port, and I say that I want the containers port, which is going to be 8080 from the how-to on the page site. You can use any port you want over 1024. Generally for websites, they start in the 8000s. And I'm going to port it over to port 80, which is your standard HTTP port, right? Your commonly known port. And then I'm going to use a -d, which says run it as a background. And then I'm going to tell it the name of the container, and I can even give it a tag of latest. And then I'm going to hit enter. And what you'll see happen is it's going to start. It's going to create a unique hashed container ID. That's a big hexadecimal number. And then I'm going to get my command prompt back. Now, if we go ahead and we do a new command, which is docker ps, which shows us our processes that are running currently on our Docker desktop or our Docker engine running on whatever system that we're running Docker on. If I hit enter, I get this big long thing. To go through this, the container ID is the FAA. It cut it short and it gave us all of this. The image is that WordPress with the tag, the WordPress : and the tag, which is latest. Then the command is at the entry point into the Docker container when it came up, what the command was that it ran, how long it's been running for, how long it's been up. And then you see here 0.0.0.0 saying anything on port 8080 is pointed to port 80 on our local system utilizing TCP. And then the name of our container, which is our -first WordPress. Now what I quickly did is I decreased the font size so that you can see that if you look real close, you can see that the entire line shows everything every heading lined up with every command. If we had multiple containers running here, we would see multiple containers lined up one after the other in this with the Docker PS command. Coming back over to our web browser, I'm going to go ahead and open up a new tab. In here, I'm going to put in http://localhost:8080. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm saying, hey, web browser, go to my local computer system and attempt to access port 8080 using HTTP. When I hit enter, I should see a WordPress container. So let's give it a second. And here we are. We now have our WordPress container up and running, and it's asking us to configure it. So I'm going to choose English United States. I'm going to hit continue. And then it's going to tell me, hey, in order to get started, we need to know the following items, what your database is. When I hit let's go, it's going to start asking me for that specific information. Now, we don't have a database running. I'm going to go ahead and return back to the command prompt. So here we are back at our Ubuntu desktop command line. Issuing a Docker PS, you can see that we still have our container up and running. We want to get rid of our container. We're going to go ahead and issue the next command that's going to stop our container, which is Docker stop. And at this point, I can put in the name of the container, which is our first WordPress container, and hit enter. It's going to take a second, and it comes back and says, okay, our container is stopped. Now, if I do a Docker PS here, you'll see I have nothing running. However, this container is still in existence because I didn't remove it. I only stopped it. If I do a -A, I will see that our WordPress container exited 18 seconds ago, and it was created 8 minutes ago. And the status is exited, but it's still on my system and it's still ready. I can restart this exact same container and continue working with what I need to do. But I don't want to do that. What I want to do is issue our next command, which is, first I'll do a Docker PS -A again. And I'm going to do a Docker RM for remove. And then this time, instead of using our first WordPress as the container name to close it, which I can do, I'm just going to do it a different way, just to show that you can do this also by utilizing the container ID. And all you have to do here is type in the first unique characters of the container ID. So if you have like 100 containers running, some of them might have a 5A running in them. So here I just do 5AA. I don't have to type in the whole thing. And when I hit enter, it comes back. It says, hey, 5A has been stopped. If I do a Docker PS-A, I see that I have nothing. And if I do a Docker PS, I see I have nothing. We now did our first Docker run command. We learned how to do a Docker processes through the Docker PS command. And we learned how to do a Docker processes -A, which shows us all of our processes. And we learned Docker stop and Docker remove and all the differences between them. Returning to our Docker run command, which is the focus of this lesson, let's go ahead and issue a Docker run. So I show here on the screen, I did a Docker PS-A to show all my processes, and you can see that it came back empty. And I did a Docker images to see what my images are. And now I'm going to go ahead and run a Ubuntu container because it's a lot easier for an instructional video to show the ins and outs of Docker run. So I'm going to do this command right here, docker run -it. And then I'm going to type in Ubuntu latest. And then I'm going to issue at the end a command that I want to execute on the entry point into the Docker container, which is the bash command so that I can run bash. I'm going to hit enter here. And what's going to come up is an interactive prompt that shows me that I am now running bash. If I do an ls-l here, I can see all the different things inside my Unix container. Now, we discussed in the concepts the idea of immutability and ephemeralism. Now, the immutable part of this I can show right here, where I can say touch hello world.txt. And if I do an ls-l here, you can see I have this file right here called hello world.txt. Now, if I go ahead and I exit this container, I come out, and you can see if I do Docker PS that I have one container that's exited, and you can see it here 14 seconds ago. And if I go ahead and I do a Docker start FEE, because I did not give this container a name, and that's another thing I'll talk about in a second. But if I go ahead and start it, now if I do a Docker PS, you'll see that it's been up for 4 seconds. I need to connect to this container in order to see what's going on. I do a Docker attach, and we'll go over that again in a little bit. And I'll do an FEE, which is the container ID that you see here. If I do an ls-l, you'll see that that hello world is still there. Now, if I exit out of this container, I do a Docker PS, you'll see that in the processes it's not running because it's stopped. If I look at everything, I see that I have one that's exited. If I go ahead and issue that Docker stop, and then I issue a Docker remove, and I'm just doing it with a double ampersand to do both one after the other serially. It'll do that. And if I do it a ps-a, it's completely gone. I'll up arrow to this command again. If I run it again, I've now done a Docker run in interactive mode again. Ubuntu's latest with a bash shell as my shell. If I do an ls-l here, you'll see that that hello world.txt is gone. That's just an idea of the immutability and of these containers, just putting all these concepts together. I exit back out. I do a Docker PS, and we'll see our container, which is the AA6. I'll go ahead and do a Docker stop on AA6 and a Docker RM on AA6. Again, we take a look at our processes and we have nothing there, which is great. Now I'm going to go ahead and add to our Docker command. So Docker run, I'm going to add a --rm. What this will do is when I exit out, not only will it stop the container, but it will also remove it completely. And that way I don't have to do that command Docker stop AA6 ampersand Docker rm AA6, right? And again, our AA6 will change as well. I can do a -i and a -t separated, but generally we always use them together, so it's just easier to do a Docker IT. I'm going to give it a name this time. I'm going to say my container Ubuntu latest. Now in here I don't even have to put latest because it'll default to latest if I don't put a tag, and we only have that one container. And then I'm going to again run that bash. I come in here, it comes up, our hash is different, we have a 62419 for our container ID. If I do an ls-a, if I touch hello world.txt here, do a long listing again, you'll see right there is my hello world. If I exit out of this container now, if I do a Docker ps-a this time, there's nothing there because of that --rm that we did. So the question has probably come up, hey, what if I want to actually save a file that can persist and be there when I stop the container and the container goes away and I have to start up a new container, right? Because we were talking about the idea of ephemeralism. We don't want to just stop our container and leave it in our processes. We want to just get rid of it completely. And then we want to be able to start up a new container. We're going to learn how to attach volumes to our container. So I'm going to do a quick pwd here, to find out my current working directory, which is home/netmet. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to up arrow, and I'm going to backspace all the way to right before I call the container I want to run and the command I want to start at entry. I'm going to add a -v. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put in home netmet, which is my source, a colon, and then where I want to attach that home netmet to. So I'm going to say data and add a space. And now here when I hit enter, our container will come up. When I do it ls-l, you'll see that right here I have a data directory. If I change directories into that data directory, there's nothing there right now, but I'll go ahead and touch that hello world.txt. Now we have that hello world. And now I'm going to go ahead and exit out of this container. Now here, I'm no longer in the container, I'm now on my Linux subsystem. Look at that. I have my hello world that has been saved on my local system and attached via the volume. If I do a double up arrow, now in our last container here you can see 5A087. I start a new container and it's no longer 5A0, it's now FEDE. If I do a directory listing here, you can see that my data directory is there. If I go into my data directory, lo and behold, my hello world is also in there. So I'll exit out of my container now. Let's do a quick Docker PS. You can see that we have nothing running. We want to make sure we have no stopped containers. Now coming back in, there might be another situation in which we need to be able to access a specific port on our container as well. So in order to make it a little bit cleaner so that we can see everything, I'm going to go remove the volume. Now, granted, I can have the volume as well, but I'm going to remove the volume just to make it nice and clean. And I'm going to add a -p, and I'm going to say I want port 22 to run and hit port 22 on my container. And then I'm going to add one more piece, which is a -d, which tells it to run in the background. When I hit enter here, instead of getting our interactive prompt, even though I did put that interactive prompt in there, it was overwritten by the -d, and all I got was the container ID that was created. If I do a Docker PS now, I can see that that Docker container is running. It's been up for 17 seconds, and here's what I wanted to show with that -p, that we are pointing our local host, which is this Linux subsystem, at port 22. Port 22, as you know, is SSH. You can now configure SSH on your container if you needed to and be able to access it in this way. And you saw previously at the beginning of this, we had a WordPress up and we wanted to be able to hit the web interface, and we pointed port 8080 to port 80 on the container. I think that's enough for Docker run, and I'll go ahead and complete this video and we can move on with some other commands in the next video. Thank you for watching. I hope this has been helpful. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video where we'll continue with the command line.